I always remember being told about the area's bad reputation. Druggies, hippie backpackers on acid, happy hour English teachers, foreigners hiding out from the law back home, visa overstayers, drug runners, prostitutes and wannabe Walter Mitty types. I did walk down here a couple of times about 20 odd years ago and I had trouble finding it, to be honest. That was before the MRT had opened, but it wasn't really my cup of tea anyway. Well, some of you may have heard of the reputation of Soi Ngam Duphli, Soi Sri Bamphen, but you might not have any idea of where these places are. So I'm going to give you a quick idea of the location. I'm on Ramaphore Road, round the corner from Lumpini Park. Wireless intersection is just up there. Sathon Road goes off that, and just behind me is the One Bangkok project. So this is Lumpini MRT station. We're going to walk about 300 meters in that direction, and Soi Ngam Duphli goes off on the right hand side.
Bangkok, 19th of May 2010.
During the protests and riots back in 2010, this part of Soi Ngam Duphli up towards Ramaphore Road got battered pretty badly, and this area became a bit of a no-go zone, as you can see in this video. But all the hippies, backpackers and dodgy people staying in Soi Sri Bamphen were probably too stoned or off their face to even notice. I'm of course kidding. I think the area was evacuated. In the early 1960s, Bangkok had a lot fewer hotels, and as the Vietnam War began to escalate in 1965, the economy was awash with American dollars. The city had a major building spree that brought new development, roads, foreign investment and tourists. Dozens of hotels were opening up across the city. The Malaysia Hotel opened in 1967 and quickly grew popular with American GIs on R&R from the Vietnam War. The name has nothing to do with Malaysia. That came from the family's ancestral Chinese name, which is Ma, and that's why there's a statue of a rearing horse outside the hotel. So I read a quote from someone who was staying here in 1982, and they said, "I wonder if I can get across the road to the Blue Fox without being propositioned." Now I'm not sure what the hell he could be talking about, but the Blue Fox was a bar about 20 meters away on the corner where 7-Eleven now stands, and it was popular with GIs and travellers, and it was also the place where Charles Sabraj, the famous serial killer in the 1970s, apparently picked up some of his victims. There's always the mention of drugs and prostitution. Whatever you look up online about this place, and in the late 1980s it became a destination for gay guys looking for trade. The legendary Babylon Gay Sauna opened up around the corner back in 1988, and rent boys could be found day and night around the Malaysia Hotel, often loitering in the car park. I'm going to talk to someone who had some interesting experiences here in the late 80s, early 90s. I'm meeting Karl outside the Malaysia Hotel, and that's where his journey began back in 1987. Did you ever stay here?
I never ever stayed. I've never spent a single night here, but my very first trip to Thailand started right here because I'd been told by somebody, go to the Malaysia Hotel, just, you know, tell the taxi to take Malaysia because he'll know it, and then get out and walk down Soi Sri Bamphen to Freddie's guest house. So this was where it all started, mate.
So Karl, the Blue Fox, this was a very...
This was it. This was the Blue
joint.
Fox. It was one of the original GI bars, and didn't you know it? They used to have, used to walk in. Now I remember there being two jukeboxes. There used to be one at this end and one at that end down there, and they would both be playing at the same time. But I spoke to a good mate of mine, Steve, who lived here at the same time as me. So he said, no, Karl, there were 3 music areas. I don't think it ever got decorated from the Vietnam War, and I remember the jukebox at this end used to have all the original records in it from the 60s, and it was like, if you put it in Stairway to Heaven, all you could hear was like the crackles and the bit of the music in the background. It used to be like the Malaysia, it used to be full of ladies, you know what I mean? There used to be a lot of ladies hanging around, and you know, they were just sort of there of their own accord. It was just a really cool, chill place, you know, despite my description of all the music and that, it was actually very laid back, no pressure, nice and cheap. I was really peed off when they closed it, you know what I mean? It was.
What year did it close?
It was the early 90s, can't remember exactly what, but it was definitely the early 90s. It was a stage when I was living here, because I remember someone saying to me the Blue Fox is closing, I would say 91 or 92.
There's a funny story I read, written about Sam, the original owner of Wong's, who passed away in 2003. This guy was talking to Sam and asked him how he handled getting hassled by the local cops. Sam says, when I first opened, they came around asking for their local protection fee. I said, sure, but I have to check with my business partner first. Here's his number and you can call him. The police rang the number and the other side answered, hello, Prime Minister's office. They put the phone down and tried dialing again, and once again the answer came back, hello, Prime Minister's office. The police hung up, left, and never bothered me again.
Wong was a Chinese Thai. I'm guessing in sort of like the late 80s, early 90s, I'm guessing that he was in his late 30s. It was the first place around here that did pizza. Be honest with you, I think it's one of them places that perhaps is a bit more legendary today than it was at the time. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I look back on it fondly, and it was a cool guy, and it was really a cool meeting place, but I think it's sort of like, it took on a life of its own.
So this was where you stayed. What year?
1991 turning into 1992.
Home
About
sweet
4 or
home,
5
right?
Home sweet home guest house.
Long,
And
long time.
and I remember this lady was running it. No, she was running it, and we both remember each other from all that time ago. It's amazing.
I know.
This used to be open. This was the court area. We used to sit down here and have beers. But when did you close? You know, because I came back here in 2018, and you were still open.
I am here all the time.
แต่ผมถามว่าที่นี่คุณปิดบริการเมื่อไหร่ครับตรง
Sometimes open, let's get them out.
Oh, no. Oh, right. Oh, it's still open sometimes. Oh, well, there
That's
you go.
why the sign's still there.
You learn something. Yeah.
Okay.
You learn something every time. Oh, mate, I've got a story about this place. I remember one night getting so drunk, and I ended up like waking up on the roof in my underpants. You know, I'd been bitten by all insects and that. I don't know, literally on the roof. You know, your guess is as good as mine.
Does she know?
Sorry?
Does she know?
Oh, I doubt she remembers. I don't even know if I told her. You know. One of my strongest memories from here is about 1991, 92. They had a load of people come and stay here from the Sudan.
Africa.
Yeah, Africa. And they were really suspicious, you know, because they used to hang around on that corner there. This used to be like a little restaurant area of the guest house from Home Sweet Home. And they used to like hang around, but like it was obvious they weren't tourists because they never had any money. So they just literally, they'd be like leaning against the walls, you know, like this on the corners all the time. And eventually, like the police got suspicious on what they were doing, and what they were doing runs. They'd hang around. They might be here for like a month, 6 weeks, and then they'd suddenly disappear.
What, drug runs? Like swallowing?
I'm not sure how they did it. I really don't. But it was, you know, I knew what they were doing. They keep it themselves. They were all called Omar. I remember that. I remember asking what their names were. And actually, I've got a picture of me with a couple of these guys called Omar. Anyway, yeah. So the police used to sit and eat, but it was obvious they were keeping an eye on them. And I just remember one day, I was on that corner there talking to one of the Omars, and like when he left, the police just zeroed in on me. You know, how do you know him? How long have you known him? Well, you know what I mean? Like, what does he do? Where is it? Oh, it was all like that. And what would happen? They'd be here for like 6 weeks, a month or so, and then they'd disappear. And they might disappear for a week, might disappear for 2 weeks. They might just disappear altogether. And at that time, there was a big incidence of African people getting caught at Don Mueang Airport. You know, going on runs and getting caught. And you know, and this was all tied up. But it. You know, like I don't want to give you the wrong impression. No, it wasn't all African people doing it. Believe you me, most of the people who did them runs from here were young Western guys. They'd come out here and they'd fall in love with the place and the lifestyle, and then sort of like the money run out. And then there were people around who knew people, and they'd sort of like tell them how it worked, and they'd end up sort of going on runs to like places like Taiwan, Japan, were two of the
people
places.
who've fallen on hard times, right? Coming down there looking for...
Yeah, but not like real bad hard times. I suppose they could have flown home. It was just people who enjoyed the lifestyle so much they didn't want to go home. No, I think most of them got away with it, but not all of them.
Did you ever make friends with people or meet people here that were found dead or committed suicide?
I knew of some people who died. You know, some people used to come here and develop various habits that they probably couldn't have avoided back home. And yeah, it wasn't unusual for one of them to be found slumped in a toilet of one of the guest houses. Because
that was always like the story, wasn't it? Khao San Road was a bit lightweight compared to this area. This is where you come if you wanted to, you know...
That was kind of how we saw it. You know, we had no interest in the Khao San Road. In them days, Khao San Road was all backpackers, and we used to joke that, you know, all they did was like argue over the price of a tuk-tuk, you know. That was the, but you know, thinking back now, I can see like it was a pretty wild place. There were a lot of dodgy things going on, but when you live in a place like that, that just becomes normality.
Yeah.
You know, but it didn't have a hostile vibe to it. It was just sort of like when you spent time here, you just got to see the background and you saw who was who and who was doing what. And that was when the truth about the place would emerge. You know?
Yeah. Carl, I heard stories about this gaff,
The Boston Inn.
Boston Inn. A lot of stories.
You know, and it wasn't a place I spent a lot of time, Pat, you know, but probably a deliberate decision that was. I think even when I first came here in 1987, it was like, you know, like the place had warnings going around about it. It was old and decrepit even then, you know. I think like it needed a lot of money spending on it to renovate it that never got spent. I remember a mate used to stay here. He used to tell me it could be quite a laugh sometimes. Apparently, like the swimming pool in the middle bit, they used to guys like would get on the second and third floor and jump from their rooms into the swimming pool. You know, I never did that myself. I did stay here at least once myself, but it was quite late in the day. It was 2004. I think I'd just been travelling from somewhere, and I ended up spending the night in Bangkok. And I went down to Freddy's, and it was closed. So I ended up staying here. Well, all I remember was there was no running water.
I was going to say, I heard it was a place with no water. I mean, what did you have to bring buckets?
I think they filled a bucket up. I remember there was a bucket there. It was old, mate. It was decrepit. They had like a reception area with like pinball machines, you know, sort of the old Americana thing. But in all honesty, a place I avoided. Story about this place from my very first night in Thailand, Pat. What happened was the first night I flew out with a couple of mates. I was 23, my mates were even younger. And we went up to the Blue Fox, and I can remember seeing a girl there called Dang. And she looked quite nice, and I sort of like, she kept smiling. So I went over the table and started talking to her, and I remember buying her a Coca-Cola. And then she had these keys to her apartment, and she was like, her room, and she was like flicking them around, and then she ended up like inviting me back to her room. So I remember going up to my mates and then going, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going back to her room." I go, "I pulled." So anyway, I walked out, you know, we come here, we went upstairs. I remember we spent ages talking, and I can remember like we were just sort of getting to know each other, and she like showed me a passport, and she was 1 day older than me. I remember that. And then anyway, you know, like we sat down, and she was getting a bit close and getting a bit cozy.
Getting romantic then.
It was getting romantic. Yeah. And then just sort of like at the last minute, she sort of said, "What are you going to give me?" And I said, "What? What?" And she's like, "What are you going to give me?" And I'm like, "What?
What, cash?"
It's like that. Yeah, like that. And I said, "I didn't know you're that kind of..." She goes, "What are you getting angry for? What are you getting angry for?" And then in the end, I was getting like quite up, you know, because I thought I was just naive, you know, I was green. And then in the end, poor girl, she tried to make it easy for me. She said, "Don't worry, Karl, just take me to the crocodile farm in the morning." But I stormed downstairs. I went back to the Blue Fox, and my mates were still there. Adam and Phil were still there. And I walked in, they go, "You're back quick." And I said, "She was a working girl, wasn't she?" And they went, "No."
said this was the original guest house.
It was one of the original guest houses. I'm not sure it was absolutely the first, but it was definitely one of the first. And even back then, it had a reputation as sort of one of the more traditional style places. And when you look and see, you know, it's all wood and everything. It was, you know, it was
lovely.
very nice, very peaceful. But my memories of it is like a very good friend of mine, Mike, used to live in a room right there. And it was, I think it was kind of makeshift room. I think it was made of plywood. And you couldn't even stand up in it properly. You know, he got a real good deal on it. And I remember, like, he used to go out sometimes, and if he'd meet a girl, he'd invite him back, and they'd say, "Where do you stay?" And he used to say, "The Oriental Hotel."
But he'd bring him back here.
And then he'd bring her back here.
So Carl, in your heyday, mate,
In my heyday, thank you, Pat.
where did you live around here?
This was the place, mate. This was the creme de la creme of all the guest houses in the area. This is the first place I ever stayed in Thailand, and at one time I lived there for over 2 years. Freddie's guest house too. You know, it wasn't a flash flat. It was cheap. You know, it wasn't ensuite bathrooms. In them days, it wasn't even air conditioned. But what it did have, it just had a really cool feel about it. It had a lovely restaurant area in the back. It had a communal area that was just here where they had, you know, like a big sofa and a TV and a VHS recorder, so you could sit there and burn away the time. It was just full of people who stayed there a long time, you know what I mean? They'd get their room, they'd get in their favourite room, and that was it. They weren't going anywhere.
What kind of characters did you meet here?
There were some, yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but it was a real mix. You know, most of them were good people. They really were. They were sort of like, they were either scammers or English teachers. You know what I mean? It was probably about 50-50. You know, a lot of them. But there was a few. I remember one who was a tennis teacher. Just people who loved this place and wanted to stay here.
You had some good times here. How long was you here?
The first time I stayed here was it was August '87, my first night in Bangkok. But in the very early 90s, like 1991, I lived here for about 2 years. When I married my wife, I was living here. We used to live in room 24. We kitted it out nicely, bought a TV and our own TV and video. It was really well run. It was run by a guy called Lack, Mr. Lack, who was a big Chinese Thai guy. Mr. Lack used to have to sort of like look after the police, and in return, whenever they used to do raids, sometimes they'd raid the guest houses, like really looking for drugs, you know. They used to raid all the guest houses in the area, but he'd get a tip off. He'd get warned in advance, you know what I mean? So I think if it was anybody he didn't want to stick around, he sort of like wouldn't tell them if he liked them. They'd get a warning. Well, anyway, I just remember walking downstairs one day, and the police were talking to my wife. She was sitting in the restaurant area, and I went up to the copper, and I just sort of, you know, I spoke Thai to him. I said, "Is there a problem?" You know, and he just sort of said, "Oh, you two together?" I said, "Yeah," and he just said to me, he said, "Okay, we don't need to look in your room." You know, he was quite friendly. Anyway, what my wife told me, like decades later, she told me that apparently Lack had told them, hands off of our room. You know, he liked us because he never had any problems for us. So the police never used to search our room. But what she didn't tell me at the time was that all the girlfriends of all the guys who stayed there who liked to smoke, when they heard there was going to be a raid, they knew our room weren't going to be searched. So they gave it all to my wife, who hid it in our room.
What was it, like weed or speed? Or...
Oh yeah, just a bit of weed, you know, but it was like, I was just really shocked to find that out so long after the event, you know.
Anyway, Carl, look, thanks for
Pleasure, mate.
walking around with me today. It's been an education, I must say. And like I said, you know, this wasn't really a place I came to, but I'd heard stories, and you've kind of confirmed some of those stories about what this place was like. But obviously you had good times, so
Yeah,
It's not all
no,
bad.
yeah, that's the overall feel of it. It's like, you know, you say all these things and it gives you the impression it was just this really sort of dangerous place. But the reality, it weren't, you know, everybody was friendly talking, they'd see each other's, you'd see them in the bars and you'd say hello and everybody would have a beer, but just sort of like they were doing whatever they were doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that just about concludes our look around this previously infamous backpacker and traveller area. Please do subscribe if you haven't already done so. Like, share, leave a comment, say hi. If you want to support me and support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link on the screen, or you can join the channel and become a member. That just leaves me to say what I always say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.